الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ثم أما بعد. L.P. Harvey in his book Muslims in Spain between 1500 to 1614 says, elsewhere in the Islamic world, and here is describing the Muslim experience in Andalus. In particular, was talking about the intellectual experience they had in Andalus. He said, elsewhere in the Islamic world, there are no exact parallels to what happened in Spain, which is all the more reason for students of Islam and for linguistics to pay more attention to the Andalusi experience. I believe reading in history of Islam, everywhere almost, in the East, in the West, North or South, indeed, something like we have today here in the West and in America in particular, there is no such thing so parallel to our experience here in America than the Andalusi experience. Check in the books that were about the subject of Al-Andalus and the Islamic experience in Al-Andalus. Unfortunately, little we know from Islamic sources. Most, if not all these sources, all these books written about that particular period, coming from non-Islamic sources, which means scholars who take specific specialty in history, European history, and they take that particular specialty in Spain, Al-Andalus in particular. Few Muslim students or scholars would go and study that particular area. For some reason, history seems to be nationalized. So if you would like to study the history of the history of a specific area, you have to be part of that area. And if you're not from Europe, then why should you even study the history of Spain? So we see most of Muslims, when they study the history of Spain, they just stop by the narratives of the events, what exactly happened there, and how the glorious Islam was represented in Spain to Europe, and then after that the decline. And in between, just beautiful stories, tales, inventions, memories, and that would be it. Little we see people going deep into the Muslim experience, specifically after what happened after the capitulation of Granada in 1492. Sheikh Yaser Birjas Hafidahullah last night, he started his history class basically about immigration to America from 1492. This lecture was supposed to precede his lecture, to talk about Muslims from 711 until 1492 before he even started his talk. But I'm bringing it back over here to you to see what exactly happened during that same period somewhere else in the world, and that's in Spain. We have so many misconceptions when it comes to the study of the issue of the history of Spain, saying that, Spain is not a Muslim land anymore, so why should you even be concerned about it? Well, look at what's going on in Europe, and even in America. For the first time in history, really, for the first time in history, these massive movements of immigration from the Muslim land to non-Muslim land on voluntary basis never happened in history before. In the past, large number of Muslim population will fall under non-Islamic rule because of war. Muslims, they lose lands, and then all of a sudden, Muslims, they find themselves under non-Islamic rule, and they have to adapt to that new system. Therefore, you see in Europe, so many Muslims live in Romania, Czechoslovakia, even so many countries, Bulgaria and others, by tens of thousands, if not even more than that. And they have been living there for generations and generations. No one considers them outsiders. No one says they are immigrants. No one says anything like that because they are locals. They are considered Europeans from that same land. But for the first time, probably in the history of Muslims, we have these massive now immigration waves coming from the Muslim land looking for opportunities in the West, in Europe, and in America. And they created a totally different story. It's totally different from the story of the local Muslims who were born, who belong to that area and that land. They were part of it, so they have no other choice. We have to assimilate. We have to find our way within the culture that, of course, now becoming prevalent over them. And our situation is a little bit different. There are some parallels and some lessons that we can learn from the Andalusi experience in order to prevent one I would call it really of the saddest events, not just for Muslims, even for history of mankind ever happened. That massive or forcible conversion of the Muslims into Christianity in Spain that took years and years and decades forcing them into Islam. And then at the end, when they thought that they cannot be truly Christians, they decided, after contemplating so many other solutions, if you read them, you will be appalled by how the people they were thinking, subhanAllah. Sheikh Walid Bassin was talking about the issue of terrorism, and sometimes you feel that this is some kind of other religious terrorism, and even state terrorism, in the form that we have to get rid of all those people, thinking of taking them into ships and sink those ships in the sea, so that they don't go to anywhere to assist the Muslims against their people in Spain. Eventually, they didn't do that. What they did was something else. They decided to expel all the Muslims out of Spain between 1609 and 1614. Waves of ships taking Muslims, or the Moriscos basically, from Spain and taking them to the North African shore. This event happened, and until this day, you will find some people who are apologetic about it, saying, you know what, Muslims cannot survive in a non-Muslim land. They cannot assimilate perfectly. They cannot be loyal. They cannot be citizens. They cannot be this. So they have all their opinions regarding how Muslims can be really assimilated or should be rejected. The issue of coexistence, is it now coming back to the surface in America? Are Muslims facing the same probably history of the Spanish people? Or are we facing something different and probably another unique a chapter in the history of Islam in the West? One of these latest events that is considered very, very parallel to some of them important events happened in Spain recently happened in France. In the past few months, if you remember, there was some kind of uprising in France from the poor, who started refusing their being actually put on the margin of the life in Spain and in France, and they started revolting against the society, trying to prove their existence, they're trying to find their recognition, and became so violent. Now the French government starts putting the issue of immigration under question. It's not right now blocking immigration, it is actually what are we going to do with those people? If they're not going to assimilate, how are we going to do it? The issue of the hijab. If they want to live in France or Europe, then what should we do? They have to obey and follow these rules. Now, even the issue of the cartoons of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which every single Muslim will really feel the pain of how Rasulullah being portrayed in these areas, not knowing who was he, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now we feel that it's a matter of challenge. It's a matter of challenge. Now they're trying to speed up the process of clash of civilization. So if there is any way to avert that and stay away from that destiny of the Muslims in Spain back in 1614, here in the 21st century, in order to understand that, we need to get back a little bit in history and see how Islam came to Spain and what Islam really contributed to the European land. Just to give you an idea that if there is really fairness, if there is justice in giving Muslims the opportunity to live, giving them the opportunity to express themselves, giving the opportunity to produce and be active, they will be very positive citizens, and they contribute not just to Islam and Muslims, to mankind and to humanity. Let's see how the story began. When studying Spain, or at least in this lecture, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to be dividing the history of Spain, at least for the Islamic period of Spain, into two different or distinct periods. The first period is the Muslim reign, which starts from 711 until 1492. This is the official Islamic reign in Spain, from 711 until 1492. Exactly, actually, it's January the 2nd, 1492, the capitulation of Granada. Then the second period, which is post-Islamic reign or Muslim reign, which began from 1492 until the last ship that departed from the Iberian Peninsula towards the northern shores of North Africa, which was in 1614. So even after the official existence of the political rule of Muslims in Spain, Muslims still existed for another 100 and so years before they were completely expelled officially from the Iberian Peninsula. Let's take the first period, which is the period of the Muslim reign. In the period of the Muslim reign, it started in 711, and we all know, probably so many people know this story, which became like a legend. When Tariq ibn Ziyad, he went all the way to Morocco, and then when he started looking beyond the boundaries of the desert, he saw the ocean, and he didn't know where to go next because he wanted to continue spreading the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Islam and so on. And then he looked up north and he found some kind of mountains there, which is Europe. So he said, okay, then if there is no other way, we should go there. And they crossed the sea. So they went across the Mediterranean, and there they hit the land where they have the mountain that is called Jabal Tariq in the Arabic language, Gibraltar. It's actually after Tariq ibn Ziyad himself. So he went there, and then the legend continues and says that he went and he burned the ships, and he starts calling his own soldiers, saying, listen, Al-Bahru min waraikum, the sea is from behind you, and the enemy is from in front of you, which means you have no other escape. You have to fight, whether you win or you die. This story is very popular in books of history, but does it have any legitimate basis to say that that's exactly what happened? Just to fantasize the issue of, Islamic enthusiasm to spread in da'wah through the jihad and so on. Actually, there are other parallel stories explain what exactly had happened. What happened is that during that same period, in the Arabic sources, they use the name of the royal family in Spain, which is Richa, or Huitzia. So Huitzia, that royal family, being betrayed by some other rivals there, and they had some allies on the North African shore, and they sought the assistance of Tariq ibn Ziyad, which was the emerging power in North Africa, saying, we need your assistance to help restore order and the royal family in Spain. And they volunteered, they offered them the ships that Tariq ibn Ziyad took with his soldier, with his army, to go across the sea towards the Iberian Peninsula. It was an alliance between both parties. And he went across to the sea, they tried to restore order, erupted more wars, and then Tariq ibn Ziyad consulted Musa ibn Nusayr. You see, we went there, it's very dangerous, shall we continue? He was given the green light, he continued fighting, and because the Visigoths were actually in decline, and were now getting weaker and weaker in their power, they almost lost it in front of the Muslims, and the Muslims, they took almost the whole Iberian Peninsula swiftly, except for a pocket on the north, which was the beginning of taking back the Iberian Peninsula from the Muslims. But eventually, this now lasted between 711 until 756, which was called the period of the Emirates, Al-Imara, in the Arabic language. Al-Imara was ruling, the governor of Spain at that time, the Muslim governor of Spain, was ruling for the Umayyads in Damascus in the east. So it was part of the Umayyad dynasty's rule. When the Umayyads lost their power and their reign for the Abbasids, one of their emirs, he escaped the east and he ran away to North Africa. On North Africa, when he arrived there, he was going as far as possible away from the Abbasids' power, so he could go as far as possible to restore the Umayyads' power again. There he arrived at the northern shore of Africa, about to cross the sea, the Strait of Gibraltar, through there to go to his supporters. And some of his supporters were waiting for him. And that's when Abdul Rahman, known by Abdul Rahman ibn Hisham or Abdul Rahman al-Dakhil, Satar Quraysh, he swam, he crossed the distance, the whole actually area, which is about 10 miles. He crossed that swimming with his son. His son couldn't make it though. But he continued swimming from the northern shore until he arrived at the Iberian Peninsula. Today, when people do that, they take the TV with them. Cameras, and they set records, and all these kind of things, and so on. And I think none did that probably before them. Abdul Rahman was the first person, as far as we know, at least in our history, was the first person to do that swimming. He went and he swam the whole actually distance, and when he arrived there, he got that support, and he restored another Umayyad dynasty to continue in Spain. After some time, one of his probably offspring, Abdurrahman the third, he established what has become to know in history as Al-Khilafah, another rival Khilafah called Al-Khilafah Al-Umayyah versus Al-Khilafah Al-Abbasiyah in the east. So they established a whole reign of the Khilafah or the Caliphate in Spain. During that period of the Caliphate or Al-Khilafah, the Umayyads Khilafah or Caliphate in Spain is considered the golden age. That was the golden age for Islamic civilization. Most of what you hear about, the glory of Islam and the inventions and all the discoveries in mathematics and medicine and then astronomy and all these kind of things happened during most of these actually events took place during the Khilafah of the Umayyads in Spain, which lasted between 756 until 1031. What happened next? At the end of that era of the Caliphate, when the final Khalifa died, he didn't leave a successor. He left a young boy. So they had to create this royal regency to protect the crown or the throne until he reaches age which qualifies him to rule. That even empowered the regency against the Umayyads. So when the regency could not continue after one generation, people of all the Iberian Peninsula started revolting and trying to take over. And by doing so, no one acknowledged that universal central Khilafah in Qurtuba anymore. So they start splitting, creating their own independent principalities. They call them al-Tawa'if or the Taifa. Even in the Spanish language, there is the word Taifa, which is Ta'ifa in the Arabic language. And that means independent principality or group of people. Because these principalities, the official number actually in many historical sources say they broke the whole Iberian Peninsula to 39 independent principalities. Can you imagine that? Spain was broken to 39 independent states, small tiny states. Some of these states even was just one single fortress. And that was it. So there's one governor, one ruler, who has his own probably household and family around him, his animals, and he declares independence. And they start fighting against each other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the story of Uhud, and afterwards as well during Hunayn, that if you split, وَلَا تَنَازَعُوا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. That if you split, what's going to happen? You get weaker, وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. Is you fail, and then your power will just go with the wind. And that's it. No one will recognize you. And that's what exactly happened. So they became very weak, and they started fighting against each other. They even sought alliance with the Christian crown up north against one another. So they start fighting against each other, and even they trade land for the power. So they take piece of the land, they give up some lands in order to get some support from up north or from other alliances from within those principalities themselves. Just to give you an idea on how things went so bad actually during that time, people even, subhanAllah, became completely inconsiderate, and they were very spoiled. I mean, they were lavishly rich. Spain was a great place actually to live in. And even during that time of these independent principalities, ulama continued flourishing and science continued going on, and so it never stopped, kept going on. Because these now independent principalities, they were fighting against each other, and they want the support of scholars, they want the support of scientists, they want the support of all the science that they can get in order to help them fight against their enemies and their rivals. So even these now fights contributed a lot to science and knowledge. So they built most of what you see in Spain of these beautiful forts, beautiful business structures were done during that age. So when you go, you get fascinated by the inventions, subhanAllah, of these weak and small, tiny groups. Just to show you how lavishly they lived actually, and they were so rich during that time, Al-Mu'tamid ibn Abbad, Sahib Ashbiliya, who was the governor or the leader of Seville, and he was probably leading one of the largest and the biggest of these principalities. One time, it is narrated in a biography of his family and household, that his wife, she was one time walking, or basically riding in the countryside, and she noticed some of these villagers, women, working in the field, and they're stepping in the mud, and just carrying these skin bags on their shoulders and their backs. So being, of course, the queen right now of Seville, she desired to do something like this. And she says, wow, this is look cool. I mean, I wish I can do that. But for her prestige, she could not do it. So she asked her husband, who granted her wish. He ordered that in the backyard of their castle, a piece of land to be dug, and then watered with water until it becomes muddy and sticky. They added the saffron and all the perfumes and then whatever you wish actually to smell there. And then they made all these nice skin bags, and then they sewed them with gems and with silk. And they called her, of course, with the ladies of the castle, and they started playing around in the mud. That was during a time of weakness like this, and they were acting in that attitude. We're not saying that this is why they lost it, but indeed, it was more than this. It was more than this. However, something that needs to be credited to Mu'tabid ibn Abbad, it's because of him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed Islam to stay another at least probably 300 years in Spain. Because during his time, he was threatened by the alliance of the north, Christians, and also some other rival principalities. So he sought assistance and help from his own wazirs and ministers, who advised him to go and seek help from North Africa. And the closest to him was Al-Murabitun, the Murabids in the English resources. And the Murabids were kind of, considered very conservative community. Very, very conservative community. Comparing now the lifestyle of the Murabids with Seville and Spain, it's completely contradictory lifestyle. But they told him that, listen, it might be really threatening because if the Murabids come in here, they might never get back again to Morocco, so you better just keep them there. He decided, no, it's better that we seek alliance with them than just fall to the Christian crown, which he did. So he went and he called the Murabids, the Murabitin, and when the Murabids, they came and they won the battle against the Northern Alliance, they of course, obeyed the deal between them, and they withdrew to North Africa, eventually leaving, of course, some pieces of their army there for protection. After some time, they came back again, and they took Al-Andalus from all these principalities. So they wiped them out completely, and they established order back again under one leadership. Now, the Murabids between 1090 and 1146, actually, they didn't last too long. Because Al-Muwahhidun, or the Mohads in the English resources, they came and they took it over from them, and they also extended the presence of Islam until 1224, when another generation of Muslims coming from North Africa, Banu Marine, they took over, and they were the last dynasty that ruled in Spain. Their rule stayed only in one particular region, and that's the southern belt of the Iberian Peninsula, what we know today as Al-Andalus. Their capital was Granada. Sheikh Yaser Birjas was talking yesterday about that period of Spain. It was during that age, the final age of the Muslims' presence officially again in the Iberian Peninsula. Banu Marine, later on, another state was established under a different title, the Nasrid's Kingdom. They became the last Muslim dynasty ruling in Spain. They ruled between 1224 until 1492, exactly January 2nd, 1492, when the capitulation of Granada was signed and the keys were handed by Abu Abdullah, or Abu Abdil, as they call him in English resources, given to Isabella and Fernando. Now the Muslims, during that age, of course, there's a lot that we can talk about, but I would think it's not very, very relevant to our time. Because that time, when the Muslims were the majority, it's easy to say how much Islam or Muslims contributed to Europe and to that civilization. One of the most beautiful things, and even non-Muslim historians acknowledge that fact, how Muslims contributed to the progress and diversity of Europe, is the lifestyle of tolerance between all these cultures. In Islamic Spain, Muslims, and specifically during the time of the Khilafah, the Umayyad Caliphate or Khilafah, Al-Hakam al-Thani, he established huge libraries of hundreds of thousands of books, inconceivable in the mind of Europeans at that time. They had all these beautiful libraries. Universities were established. Hospitals were established. Houses of translations were established all around the Islamic state. And specifically, the closest to the Christian land was Toledo or Tulaytila. Tulaytila was one of these urban areas that fell early into the hand of Alfonso the Sixth. And Alfonso, he was a wise man. And in some sources, they say that he even knew Arabic language. He himself was a knowledgeable person, a man of knowledge. And he admired this, civilization somehow. And he was religious in his own, of course, fashion. But when he went to Toledo and he saw all these beautiful books and manuscripts and so on, he immediately ordered that these books to be translated into their language, the Latin language in particular. And when they translated these books, they were fascinated about how much these Arabs or Muslims, how much knowledge they got from the Roman and the Greek philosophy and knowledge, and they reproduced that into their own language. And now it's because of the Muslims in Spain and the Arabs who lived in Spain that these actually sciences or these knowledges were preserved and then were transformed back to their own language, to the European languages, and thus start spreading all over the land. But it was the Muslims who really contributed for that. And during that time of Al-Hakam al-Thani, you see in these libraries and these houses of translation, scholars from all over Europe, Muslims, Jewish people, Christians, all of them, they worked together. They used to come and learn from one another. You see the same thing happening here in America. And we wish that this to stay like this, and we don't want this to change, because people having a specific agenda, trying to create another parallel of the 1614. What had happened after 1492? Sheikh Yaser spoke about Columbus. Now the attention is towards the West. But what exactly was going on while they were discovering, or at least they were lost and America discovered them? So after they discovered America, what was exactly going on and happening to the Muslims? In the Arab sources at least, a source in the Arabic language regarding the history of Spain, I read so many of these books. Unfortunately, all the books I read, except for few, they stopped at 1492, which means that's it. So they gave in, they just submitted, Granada, and they left to Fez in Morocco, and that was it. Okay, what happened? I mean, I cannot imagine thousands of Muslims who lived in Spain, all of a sudden, they just disappeared. Something happened to them, whether it's positive or negative, but we have to understand, see what exactly happened to these Muslims who lived in Spain afterwards. Well, part of the treaties, part of the edicts of the capitulation of Granada in 1492 is that Muslims should live freely and should preserve their religion, they should practice their religion and keep their masajid and houses of worship intact. They should not be harassed by any means. And I want you to learn and know that Granada, the Andalus state of the Nasrid state, was a very, very rich state. Don't think of them they lost because they were poor. No. They were lavishly rich. And they had a lot of scientists and ulama amongst them. So there were a lot of good things happening and going on there. It's just for other reasons, specifically the rivalry between Abu Abdullah or Abu Abdil al-Saghir and his uncle that led to this now alliance between Abu Abdil himself and Isabel and Ferdinand, which led, of course, again to fight against his uncle, who lost the battle for them, and that was a deal afterwards that he would submit Granada to them, which he did. So, what happened to the Muslims after the capitulation of Granada? Historians say there were three major events that led to the expulsion of Muslims from Spain. The first event happened almost 9 years, just less than 9 years after that treaty was signed, around 1500. The second event, major event, was in 1568 until 1571. It's called the Second Granadan War, because the first one was called the first actually war. It's called Thawrat al-Bayazin, which means the revolution of the Bayazin, al-Bukharas. And then they have the second one in the 1568, and then the last one was in the early 1600s. So between 1609, 1614, they decided that all these Moriscos should be expelled out from Spain. But what exactly happened? I mean, what are these events anyway? The first event, when the Muslims signed the treaty, they thought that they're going to preserve their religion, and they're going to continue to stay there worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they worship, at least the religion shouldn't be intact. But one of these active missioners, who was the head of the Inquisitive office, who came with this idea of bringing all the Iberian Peninsula to Catholicism. They were very religious people in their own religion. And they were very, very active, and to some extent you consider them extremists. They wanted to take all possible measures to take those people out of their religion to Catholicism, to create one religion for Iberian Peninsula. Should be no other religion. Sheikh Walid was talking about Hadith al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, keeping one religion in the Arabian Peninsula, and in Spain, they were trying to keep one religion in the Iberian Peninsula. So there should be no Muslims left at all. They should all change, whether they become Christians or not. They tried certain way that didn't work. Eventually that led to a revolution. The first revolution, the first revolt of the people of Granada. After the end of that revolution, which was unsuccessful, they decided that the Muslims broke the treaty. And now they are under no obligation to keep those now points of peace with them. So therefore, they were given one option. Those who revolted in Granada, they were forced to become Christians. And that was the first forceful conversion in the 1501. They were forced to become Christians. So they were baptized. And I want you to imagine that. Those people were born in Islam. They have been living with Muslims for hundreds of years before that even, and some of them probably they're 50 years old, 60, younger or older, a little bit, and they speak the Arabic language. They still speak Arabic language. Spanish was not very popular for them at that time, still in the south. But for those Muslims who stayed up north, they spoke also Spanish. But for those people, they're still speaking Arabic right now, and you want them to become Christians. So they were baptized, superficially of course, registered as Christians right now, or Catholics. And they were given non-Muslim or Spanish names. But do you think that's going to be very easy for them to accept that? So they start acting, superficially as Christians, and then in their own personal gatherings start acting as Muslims. This led to the presence of three different, I would say, groups of Muslims in Spain. The first group are original Muslims who did not participate in these revolts or these revolutions. They were kept Muslims. So you had the Muslims, they would call them Moors. Then those people who became forcefully Catholics, they were called Moriscos. And then there was a third category, an earlier category, before these two categories probably, called Al-Mudajjars or Mudakhars. So Al-Mudajjars, in the Arabic source they call them Mudajjanin. And Mudajjan or Mudajjar are those Muslims who lived as Muslims, spoke the local language of the places where they used to live in under the Christian crown. So when the Christian crown started retrieving the Iberian Peninsula from the hands of Muslims, many Muslims fell into, of course, to the hand of the Christian crown. And they stayed there. They lived there. They kept their lands. They kept their houses. They kept their businesses. They kept their loyalty to the state over there. So they stayed all this time living there, surviving and acting and interacting normally with the society. Many of them were successful merchants. Many of them were successful doctors. Many of them were successful farmers and artisans. They were very famous and known for the good work that they do. So basically they lived there and they were called Mudajjars. They flourished the economy of the Christian state there. So they were considered one independent category. They spoke the language of that land. According to this definition, most Muslims who live under non-Islamic rule, and including here in the US, would probably fall under this category, Mudajjars. So they live there as loyal citizens, they act normally, and they preserve their religion, they practice freely, and they were never harassed because of being Muslims. Until now the capitulation of Granada and now the forceful conversion, the first forceful conversion against the Muslims. Before the Muslims, the Jewish were forced into Catholicism, by the way. But the Muslims, that started after the capitulation of Granada. Then, generation later, Muslims, they tried to preserve their identity, and now there started a lot of wishful thinkings among the church and the Vatican to now, right now, create one religion for all the Iberian Peninsula. So they start slowly and gradually forcing the Muslims into Christianity until the official announcements of this conversion in 1520, 1521. All should become Christians, including the Mudajjals. Some, of course, the members of the royal family, they rejected that, or at least they objected to it briefly for economical reasons and political reasons. But eventually it happened that they were all forced into Christianity, and some of them, to tell also a historical factor, some of them, willingly, they just participated and immediately entered Christianity, because for them it was a lost battle anyway. Or maybe because they just didn't know, they had some kind of identity crisis, so they would grow up becoming Catholics and becoming part of the whole society. However, in the eye of the Spaniards, they were looked upon as Moriscos, and they were still called Moriscos. They lived for generations as Moriscos. These Muslims during that time, they were banned from showing any signs of Islam or Arab culture. Arabic language speaking was banned. Using the Arabic characters in writing was banned. Dressing somehow, gradually and slowly, was banned. And even they forced Christian families to come from up north to live down south in Granada in order to make sure that those now new Christians learn Christianity. They helped them at the beginning, before 1520, to preach Christianity or Catholicism in the Arabic language. So the priests were speaking Arabic language to these new members of the parishes. And when it didn't work in 1520s, they just stopped doing that. So eventually, they had to try to change those people, take them out of their way, using their language and their culture. One fascinating thing I learned, subhanAllah, from reading this history, is that the Islamic culture, which is something we need to learn from this, the Muslim identity and the Islamic culture was so strong that all these forces of changing and conversion could not really wipe out everything completely. As a matter of fact, some of these families who came down south to Granada, some of them, there were some reports that they converted to Islam. And even, of course, a few number. And some of these issues that even entailed a royal and a papal decision or decree to ban the practices considered the Moorish practices, like the dress. You know, when the people came from up north, they came down south to Granada, they were fascinated by the Nasiri's dress or style or fashion. Because Granada was just probably like New York, in the house of fashion. So when they came down, they started dressing like them. The Christians started dressing like the Muslims, not the opposite. So immediately after 10 years, there came a royal decree. No Spaniards allowed to wear like the Moriscos. It took them another 10 years for a papal decree comes out saying no Spaniards are allowed to even to do that. And even they start finding the tailors. Anyone who's found to do or sew all these kind of apparels similar to the Moorish will be fined. So it was so powerful that people could see the Muslim culture, subhanAllah, so strong and could even survive during difficult times like the times they were going through. During this time, what had happened? Muslims tried to preserve their identity as much as possible. And I'm not saying this because we are facing the same scenario today here in America. Because alhamdulillah, this we are not forced to become Christians. You are now free to live as a Muslim. And you should keep it that way. Means you should practice and act as Muslim freely. And Muslims, they were recognized through specific, let's say, practices that preserve their identity. And they tried to keep that as much as possible, even when they were forced after 1520 into Christianity, the massive forcible conversion right now. Many of them started practicing Islam underground. Islam went completely underground. So what they did, they started observing these traditional dresses underground. The practice of halal meat was become a source of identity for the Muslims. Those who seek halal meat were considered Muslims. When the Inquisition office was established in order to go after these religious heresies, Islam was put as one of these heresies as well. So they would go after the Muslims. Even they check their houses. They go and they want to make sure that those no moriscos, instead of using olive oil in their cooking, they have to use lard. They force them to do so. The issue, one of the remarkable things, subhanAllah, the issue of cleanness. To be clean, to take bath, was one of these issues that made Muslims recognizable in the society. Those moriscos were banned from taking showers on Fridays. Anyone, if they hear trickles of water, in their houses, they will be reported. And if they come on Sundays, because they have to go to the mass, if they come on Sundays, smell fresh, means they have taken a bath. And that's subject to prosecution. So they will be sent to jail and interrogation if they were found taking showers even on Sunday. Why? Because they got some fatwas from mashayikh of their time, that it's okay, because you're forced right now, this is darura. When you go to Sunday mass, make your intention to attend Salat al-Jum'ah. So people, they would take shower, prepare themselves for Jum'ah, and go to the Sunday, to the church. Muslims were very, very innovative at that time. They have invented a language. They have invented a language that didn't last too long. It just survived as long as Muslims existed in Spain. Between those difficult times, the 1520s until the 1614. When the Muslims were expelled out, that language died with them. This language was speaking the Spanish language and writing it in Arabic characters. They called al-Ajamiyya or al-Hamyado. Al-Hamyado or al-Ajamiyya, in the Arabic word al-Ajamiyya or al-Ajamiyya, means it's the foreign language. So they use the Arabic characters to write the Spanish language. And they changed a lot of the Spanish actually verbs and words to fit the Arabic grammar. So they add a lot of words to the Spanish language, which is very famous and well known. Even before that time, the Arabic language penetrated actually and even infiltrated a lot of the Spanish dictionaries. Many words that start with L or L is a contribution of Islamic source. In that language, on this day, more than a little bit above 100 manuscripts survived. And they had beautiful books, subhanAllah. I mean, I personally tried to read some because I'm not really expert in Spanish language. It's very hard and difficult to read them. But you can find them even on the internet. They have some database. You can even check some of these manuscripts. And some of their books, they have also copies of these manuscripts. You check them, you'll be amazed. Some of them, they have pages from the Quran. Books in fiqh and sharia. Sheikh Yaser Birjas yesterday was talking about how African Americans, they try to preserve this Muslim identity from memory. So they write their books in their language, in the Arabic language even. They did the same thing. They were not allowed to keep books. So would they keep them and they saved them for themselves. That language again, unfortunately, died after Muslims departed from Spain. Some of the remarkable things, which we don't recommend, of course, for us to do here, but at least speak in fact of the history of Spain, Muslim Spain, is that even the innovation, the bid'ah innovations helped keep, subhanAllah, the legacy of Islam longer. Because people, they were not allowed to practice anything of the famous ahkam al-sharia. Salah was very hard even to practice. Come for Jum'ah, it's impossible. To fast even was very difficult and hard. So they had to go through a lot of things. So what they need to do? Preserve their religion with whatever they can do. So they invented specific practices in order to keep their identity as Muslims. And it kept their identity for them for some time. Most of these, of course, innovations would go around some spiritual practices and sometimes the issue of weddings and even births, like ahkam al-mawalid. So they do specific practices that help make them different, distinct from the general population. One thing about the Muslims, they were very well known to be good artisans and good craftspeople, which is, alhamdulillah, Muslims here in America, I know many, many Muslims, they are well known for this as well. And they were very good workers, and they did their job excellently. Even they were employed to work in building palaces in Granada and south of Spain as well, because of the quality of work that they can provide. So the Muslims, they knew how to do their things perfectly, because this is part of their religion. And I wish that the Muslims today here in America can keep also this legacy, bi'idhnillahi tabaraka wa ta'ala. Some of these mudajjars, at least, they participated in the political realm of their societies. So they joined offices, and even they were members of the local councils, and they tried to help the general cause of the community, not just the Muslim cause. One thing that happened because of this massive expulsion or the loss of the south of Muslim Spain was the evacuation, basically, of Spain, what I call it, it's a science, I would say, or Islamic vacuum, was created by the departure of many Muslim scholars. Many of the ulama, they left the country. And some of them, they died, and some of them just simply just went hiding, of course. They could not take it on themselves to become Christians or Catholics, so they went hiding or escaping or even departing or emigrating outside of Spain. That left a huge vacuum for the Muslims. How are we going to preserve our identity? So the issue of Islamic sciences, and specifically the knowledge in the Arabic language, became very, very, very important to them. And there are some manuscripts survived from these Al-Khamyadu manuscripts, teaching people Arabic grammar and teaching them a little bit of the basics of the Sharia. And that's what we see even here today in America and the West in general. The young generation, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, right now they're actually working on this. They would like to be more knowledgeable in their deen. Before September 11th, many people, they were just busy earning for life because that was a time of opportunity. And now people, they fell into, of course, identity crisis. They don't know what's going on. I mean, we have been Americans all this time, and now all of a sudden people look upon us differently. So what exactly the problem? Who am I? What shall I be? I mean, what shall I call myself? So they started going back again to see and explore their Islamic identity. And that's what exactly happened. And there are some examples, very famous examples in books of history of that period. The young man from Arevalo, or Mancebo of Arevalo, or del Alevaro, basically he is very well known and famous for being one of these young people who were pursuing knowledge, and they tried their best even to go outside Spain, to go for Hajj, which is a very risky would be journey for him, and learn Sharia and then come back again to serve his people. This young man, he left written legacy, few books of his own work, of course critical works. Some people, they considered it was plagiarism from some kind of Christian sources, but regardless, he was trying to bring some Islamic legacy and relief to his own community. Women's role in the society was very, very important. Since men could not do anything outside to show their identity as Muslims, it was left for women to keep the traditional legacy of Muslims alive in the house. Many Muslim women, according to historians, they were basically hiding the books inside their houses. They built double walls in their houses, and they would be hiding these books in between. They built some kind of hiding places in their own houses and in the basements. So whenever they need them, they cover them there. And when there was some kind of inspection, unexpected inspection, women, they immediately, and reportedly they were mentioned in Inquisition actually records, where would they find these books? The women, they take these books immediately and they hide them in their clothing. Immediately. Because they know, regardless, they will not be asked to remove their clothes in order to inspect, of course, their bodies. But some incidents happened that discovered these issues and were recorded in Inquisition records, that women were hiding these books. But it was left for women, really, to carry the legacy of the Muslim community in that area. From all of this and more, and I wish that we can talk even more about some of these parallels that we learned from that experience, actually, that the issue of what we call fiqh al-aqalliyat, the fiqh of minorities. It's unprecedented to our time here. Speaking about dealing with the Muslim issues and the minorities, from classical works of fiqh will be misleading. And I know many young men, mashallah, and women, brothers and sisters, they're actively working on these traditional works of fiqh to understand how to deal with our societies. But believe me, all the works of our great Muslim scholars, what they did, how they wrote, might not be reflecting what we see here in this age. Because they were talking into an environment completely different from ours. And therefore, there should be some kind of huge effort, not just individual efforts. There are some few individual efforts, some Muslim scholars, students of knowledge, writing on this subject independently. But I believe there should be some kind of massive work by Muslim scholars and students of knowledge in order to discuss many of the issues people face today. And alhamdulillah, it is going on right now through some other organizations. And I just even heard from Sheikh Walid as well, that even Amja is working on some workshop coming, inshallah ta'ala, at the end of this coming month. And they are going to be discussing some of these very important issues regarding the work field in the West. Young men and women are looking for identity. What should be the practice? Assimilation or rejection? Can we ask for a third? Could it be coexistence? Which means, can you be a Muslim, American, and feel free to be both at the same time? Or is it hard and difficult to be a Muslim without, and being American at the same time? What should be our position? This is an issue Muslims are facing today. And some people are trying to create fitan, saying this is impossible to happen. You cannot be a Muslim and American at the same time. And people sometimes they put you to the test by picking and choosing of what exactly is going on in the world today to see your loyalty, if you're American or not. Show me your identity. Are you a Muslim or Muslim American or American Muslim? What is it exactly? These issues need to be addressed thoroughly in order for people to understand what is the meaning of all these terminologies. The issue of assimilation doesn't mean that you completely melt down in the society. It doesn't mean that you go and you just adapt all the habits and all the culture that is available around you, whether it's positive or negative to you. This is the land of opportunity, a land of cultural diversity, which means you can still keep part of your culture and also enjoy being part of this whole massive melting pot in this area. As for the contribution to the society, alhamdulillah, Muslims have already been contributing for the past generations, and there are still more generations to come. Many of our contribution as Muslims to this community and this society is coming in the practical field. But unfortunately, we don't have enough in the intellectual field. We don't have enough Muslims going, let's say, and study history, study humanities, study psychology and sociology in order to contribute to the whole field of humanity in this culture. Most of our Muslims being directed to go and become doctors, become engineers, become of these high-paid positions. And they think if they go towards humanity and studying these fields, they're going to get lost in this society. We need some Muslims who will take care of this area and bring the legacy of our great Muslim scholars in psychology, in sociology, in other fields also, and contribute and bring it back with them to this society and add, like the early Muslims did, to this culture. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Why didn't the Muslims leave Al-Andalus to get away from forceful conversions? Well, first of all, I don't want really to project the 21st century view of immigrating from one place to another place on their time. Because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have been well established in that society for so long, and they were under contract and treaty to preserve their religion and, of course, their identity. But once that was broken, and because of that revolt that happened in Al-Bayazin, in Granada or Granada, they were forced into Christianity. And by the way, by the law back then, they were not even allowed to depart. They were not given the chance to depart. They gave them specific times. Some people, they were given the chance at the beginning. If they want to leave, you can leave. And that's when most people start leaving. So they left in the first few years. And then after that, all the borders were closed. Why? For two reasons. Religious reasons, because some of these Catholics, they were very extreme in their views, said that we should not allow these people, of course, to depart, because they consider them, of course, lost souls. And they want to save them. So you cannot leave them like this. They have to be saved. And that's by forceful conversion. And the other, because for political reasons. They didn't want the Muslims to leave and go to North Africa, otherwise they might recruit over there, and come back again to fight and try to retrieve the land that they lost from them. Wallahu alam. Okay, about the series of the scholar from Egypt who spoke about the history of Spain, I actually listened to that, and it's another addition to the narratives of Andalus. Nothing really profound in the analysis. Could you refer to creative books, clarify this topic? I really recommend the book of L.P. Harvey. He had a beautiful series, and when you, L.P. Harvey, Leonard Patrick Harvey, Muslims in Spain. He had two series basically. One starts from the beginning of Islam until, from the beginning of the emergence of Islam in Spain, and the other one begins from the capitulation of Spain until the expulsion from Spain. I recommend this book really, and he has a beautiful bibliography at the end. You can go and select and choose books in Spanish language and also in English language as well. Do you agree with that creation of the Abbasid Khilafah, the creation of two Khilafah? Why was it separated? Why not just follow one Khalifa? Isn't it justified? First of all, we cannot ask why, because it happened. So this now happened in history. Why? These are political issues. It's not that they were much of the most righteous people fighting to establish one Khilafah. The issue of establishing one Khilafah is a dream all Muslims, they live with. However, is it something practical? In the history of Islam, this single leader actually, or single Khilafah, was gone, was lost after the assassination of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So it's way even before the Abbas ever existed. When Uthman was assassinated, there was no one Khalifa after that time, after all, between the Muslims. Even during the time when Al-Hasan radiallahu ta'ala anhu conceded to Muawiyah, which was called Amul Jama'ah, means the Am of the unity, still, we had the Khawarij, they have their own leaders. The Shia, they have established their own leaders. Other groups, they established their own leaders. So they're all fighting. So they're all fighting afterwards. We never had one single Khalifa after the assassination of Uthman radiallahu ta'ala. So the issue of that Khalifa is going to restore order to the Ummah, Allahu alam. It's a theory that really doesn't have any strong basis. What was the name of the family that fought against each other, and one of them allied with Isabella and Fernando? They were from Banu al-Ahmar. They called them the Nasirid kingdom, and Ad-Dawla al-Nasiriyya, Al-Mamlaka al-Nasiriyya, the Nasirid kingdom from Banu al-Ahmar. Abu Abdullah al-Saghir, or Abu Abdil, is the last king, and his uncle was al-Zaghal. We see a lot of scholars, students of knowledge, who refuse to go to France because of the hardships to freely practice Islam. What should they do? I would suggest if they can really find a way of going there and help spread the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala peacefully, which is alhamdulillah very open to many public, specifically educate the Muslims not to go to that route. It's going to be very dangerous if they keep going to that route. They should be educated to become more productive in the society rather than just revolting every once in a while because of economical injustice. And I agree, there is a lot of injustice against them. But this is not a solution to solve their problems. How was Salah performed during that time, in the Andalus, during the persecution? Well, during that time, subhanAllah, the Muslim scholars, or these Muslims in Spain, they couldn't really have any access to Muslim scholars easily. So what they do, sometimes they smuggle letters with people going out and even bribe some even Spaniards who are leaving and traveling to North Africa and so on. So they carry some letters for them. And there are two famous records we have that brings us at least an idea on what exactly was going on inside Spain. One of these sources is a huge encyclopedia of fiqh written by Imam al-Wansharisi rahimahullah ta'ala. And Wansharisi, a scholar from North Africa, he collected the fatwa being asked for Muslims from North Africa and from Spain at that time. And many of these fatwa by al-Wansharisi would go along with the most conservative opinions of the most pious people. It means Muslims in Spain, they have to immigrate. But they could not. They were unable. Muslims, and this is just for the record, some of the early missions of piracy in Mediterranean were established by Muslims. I mean, it's not to be proud of this, but they had a legitimate reason to establish that. The legitimate reason was to go and raid the Iberian Peninsula shores to find an access for Muslims so they can escape. And in one night, there was actually one mission. Some of these pirates, they went to northeast of the Iberian Peninsula, and they were able to evacuate more than 700 people in one single night. The whole village was taken out. So basically, there were some attempts, and that's why most of these pirates, early pirates in the Mediterranean, were coming from North Africa. So how they perform their salah, we see some of these examples mentioned there, but some of the other actually sources, letters exchanged between Muslim scholars in North Africa and in Egypt as well, and the Muslims in Spain, they were told that they can perform even wudu without using tayammum, because even if they were seen making tayammum dry ablution, it would be an offense against them. So what they do, they were told just to stare at the wall with the intention of tayammum. That was their tahara, purification, subhanAllah. And they were told that while they're walking in the market, they can make their salah, just by not even nodding their heads, just blinking their eyes for the movements of salah, ruku', sujood, and so on. That's how they were asked to perform the salah. Now, whether you agree or not on this, to say this is a legitimate, let's say, form of salah or an innovation, bid'ah, basically, that's totally out of the question right now. Because people, they were living such extraordinary circumstances that we cannot judge in this age. Given the hardships Muslims were forced to endure, was it not incumbent upon them to make the hijrah? Well, we answered that. Actually, it wasn't easy for them to do so. And even when at the time of the expulsion, by the way, when they were expelled between 1609 and 1614, they allowed parents to leave and leave their kids. Children 12 years old and under, they were forced to stay behind. Why? Because they don't want those souls to go to the hellfire. Allah musta'an. And they were, of course, the kids were distributed to some good Catholics to grow up, in religion. Muslims in Spain were a secluded community. We live in an international community because of information age. How does that make our experience as minority different? Absolutely makes it, subhanAllah, a great difference, because now the issue of minority and majority becomes something relative right now. It's not a matter of physical number. It's an age of information. How much you know, how much you contribute, how much you can do. Basically, all of this can really prove your size. And you can see that even in this society, some people of specific minority, they prevailed over so many of the areas of this society because of their performance. So it's not about, physical number. It's about your achievements, what exactly you're doing. What happened to the masajid built by Muslims at that time? Of course, many of these masajid were converted to different issues, different places like churches. For the very famous Masjid of Qurtuba right now, actually the Masjid of Qurtuba is so huge, because that was the capital of the Islamic Caliphate in Spain. It is so huge that when they took it from the Muslims and they tried to convert that into cathedral, they built the huge cathedral within the limits of the masjid itself. So the cathedral is inside the masjid, inside the main court. And because the Umayyads were originally Arabs coming from the Arabian Peninsula, they brought with them some of their culture. And one of these famous culture that you see in Spanish architect, basically, the arcs that they build with. And there was the dual colors, specifically red, white colors, and so on. So when you look at the Masjid of Qurtuba, when you check these pillars like this, you'll be amazed. Because you think that you'll be walking in an orchard of palm trees. They all look like palm trees. How they actually been designed, hundreds of pillars in the masjid, just to give the image of the Arabian Peninsula. You go back again and see that you're living actually still in that area. Now that church, that cathedral is inside that, just basically part of the whole masjid of Qurtuba. Others, unfortunately, were converted to other places like restaurants and even bars and taverns and so on. Allah musta'an. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Khair inshallah ta'ala. Jazakum Allah khair. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.